December 17th, 1944. The frozen ground of the Ardennes forest crunched under German army boots as German officers looked at their newest capture. Dozens of captured American soldiers stood there, their breath showing in the freezing cold Belgian morning air. Among the scattered equipment, there was something that made the German officers stop, then smile with disrespect. Small rectangular boxes with strange letters stamped on them. Rations, field meals from an army they believed was weak. Spoiled by the comforts of a country that had never known real hunger on its own land. Officer Klaus Dietrich picked up one of the left-behind boxes, its contents rattling quietly inside. At 42, Dietrich had led men through 3 years of harder and harder fighting. His thin body, like those of his men, showed months of shrinking supplies and smaller meals. The German Eiserne ration, their iron ration, had been cut down to only 300 grams of canned meat and 125 grams of hard bread per day. Yet here, scattered across the forest floor like thrown-away toys, were enemy rations that seemed almost wastefully plentiful. "Look at this," Dietrich muttered to his helper. Werner Kruger, holding up the American K-ration box. The Americans even packaged their food like gifts. Pretty boxes for pretty soldiers. The officers around him laughed, a bitter sound that echoed through the pine trees. They had been told since they were children that Americans were weak. Their military was nothing more than a collection of factory workers and farmers pretending to be soldiers. These rations seemed to prove what they already believed. Overly fancy packaging for an overly pampered army. What Dietrich and his men could not have imagined was that they were holding in their hands the physical proof of a factory revolution in warfare, a symbol of a nation that had completely rethought how armies could be fed. The K-ration was not just food. It was a statement of American factory power, designed by scientist Ancel Keys to deliver exactly 3,000 calories per day to any soldier anywhere in the world. Each box contained not just food, but the concentrated essence of American plenty. Canned meat, processed cheese, chocolate bars, cigarettes, instant coffee, and even chewing gum. In that moment, as German officers examined these strange supplies, they unknowingly faced the huge gap between their own supply system and that of their enemy. The Wehrmacht's logistics had been designed for quick campaigns, lightning wars that would grab resources from conquered lands. American logistics had been designed for a completely different kind of war, one that could support millions of men across multiple continents for years, fed from the endless production lines of Detroit, Chicago, and countless other factory centers 6,000 miles from any battlefield. The German military had always been proud of being efficient, of doing more with less. Their soldiers were taught to scavenge, to adapt, to make do with whatever the land could provide. The Eiserne ration system was built on the idea that armies would add to their small official supplies with local resources: bread from French bakeries, meat from captured Soviet livestock, vegetables from Polish farms. It was a system that worked brilliantly during the quick victories of 1939 and 1940, but had begun to break under the pressure of worldwide warfare and longer supply lines. By December 1944, the difference between German and American food supplies had become huge beyond imagination. German soldiers were receiving roughly 2,570 calories per day when supplies were good, often far less when they were not. American soldiers in combat zones were eating between 3,600 and 4,500 calories daily through a combination of K-rations, C-rations, and extra field kitchens that served hot meals whenever it was safe to do so. The German army was slowly starving. The American army was, by any historical standard, luxuriously fed. Dietrich tore open the K-ration box with fingers stiff from cold and months of not enough nutrition. Inside, he found items that seemed to make fun of everything he thought he knew about warfare. A small can of processed meat, not the gristly, fatty Schmaltzfleisch that German soldiers had learned to tolerate, but actual recognizable beef. compressed biscuits that were not the rock-hard Dauerbrot that could break teeth, but crackers that dissolved pleasantly in the mouth. Most confusingly of all, luxuries that no sensible military planner would waste precious shipping space on. Chocolate bars, instant coffee crystals, and small packs of cigarettes. "They ship candy to the front lines," Kruger observed, his voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and growing worry. While the psychology of warfare shifted in that frozen forest clearing, German officers had been trained to believe that hardship created better soldiers, that American softness would collapse under the pressure of real combat. Yet here was proof of a completely different idea, that well-fed, well-supplied soldiers would fight better, longer, and with greater spirit than those who were slowly wasting away from not eating enough. The K-rations represented not weakness, but a kind of strength that Germany had never possessed. The strength of a nation that could feed its armies as abundantly in the field as at home. When Dietrich first tasted the processed American cheese, his worldview began to crumble along with the cracker in his mouth. The flavor was rich, salty, satisfying, in a way that German rations had not been for months. His aide, Kruger, bit into an American chocolate bar and closed his eyes, savoring sweetness that had become a distant memory. Around them, other German soldiers were conducting their own reluctant tastings, their expressions shifting from mockery to confusion to a dawning, terrible realization. This was not the food of a weak army. This was food that could maintain fighting strength indefinitely, that could fuel advances across continents, that could support the kind of long worldwide warfare that Germany's increasingly desperate logistics could no longer sustain. Every K-ration box represented something that the Wehrmacht leadership had completely miscalculated. America's factory capacity was not just large, it was effectively unlimited by the standards of 1940s warfare. The numbers, had they known them, would have been even more devastating to German morale. By 1944, American factories were producing enough K-rations to feed not just their own armed forces, but significant portions of Allied armies worldwide. The Quartermaster Corps had overseen the production of over 105 million K-rations since 1941, each one representing a small miracle of food preservation, packaging technology, and factory coordination. Meanwhile, German food production was declining steadily, with farming output falling by nearly 30% since the beginning of the war. Dietrich found himself eating slowly, carefully, trying to extract every calorie from the alien food. His body, used to the gnawing hunger that had become constant among German forces, responded to the rich American provisions with an almost shameful gratitude. The processed meat provided proteins that had been increasingly rare in German rations. The chocolate delivered sugars and fats that his malnourished system craved desperately. Even the instant coffee, which dissolved completely in hot water instead of leaving the bitter dregs of Ersatz substitutes, seemed like a small miracle. "How many of these do you think they produce?" Kruger asked quietly, turning the empty K-ration box over in his hands, studying the printing, the careful design, the obvious factory sophistication of something meant to be thrown away after a single use. The question hung in the frigid air like their visible breath. How many, indeed? The answer, millions upon millions rolling off production lines in quantities that dwarfed Germany's entire food distribution system, was beyond their imagination. The implications were staggering. If Americans could afford to package individual meals with this level of care and abundance, what did that suggest about their overall production capacity? If they were shipping chocolate and coffee to frontline troops, what luxuries were available to workers in their factories? If their soldiers were this well-fed, how were they equipping their tanks, aircraft, and artillery? The K-rations were not just food. They were intelligence about an economy so vast and productive that it could treat as routine what Germany could achieve only through extraordinary effort. Word of the American rations spread through German units with remarkable speed. Soldiers who had been surviving on increasingly small portions of bread, ersatz coffee, and whatever extra food they could scavenge found themselves facing evidence of an enemy force that was not just better equipped, but better fed than many German civilians. The psychological impact was deep and immediate. Armies throughout history had marched on their stomachs. What did it mean to face an army that marched on stomachs filled with chocolate and real coffee? The contrast became more obvious as winter deepened. German supply lines, stretched across a continent and constantly attacked by partisan attacks, delivered increasingly irregular and inadequate provisions. Soldiers grew used to the hollow ache of hunger, to the weakness that came from bodies consuming their own muscle mass to maintain basic functions. They learned to make thin soups from potato peels, to stretch small portions of meat across entire squads, to find food in items that would have been rejected as animal feed in peacetime. American forces, meanwhile, continued to receive not just adequate rations, but a variety of them. K rations for combat situations, C rations for longer-term field use. The solution lay in American factory capacity, but also in American farming abundance. The United States in 1944 was producing not just enough food to feed its own population and military, but enough to send significant portions overseas through the Lend-Lease program. American farmers, using mechanized equipment and modern farming techniques, were achieving yields per acre that European farmers could barely imagine. The same industrial revolution that was producing tanks and aircraft was also revolutionizing food production and preservation. German intelligence officers, when they finally began to analyze captured American provisions systematically, discovered details that should have terrified their leadership. The dates stamped on K rations revealed production schedules that suggested truly massive manufacturing capacity. The ingredients lists showed access to resources: real coffee, genuine chocolate, processed meats, that German forces could not obtain even for special occasions. Most significantly, the casual wastefulness with which American soldiers sometimes discarded partially consumed rations suggested a level of abundance that was almost incomprehensible to men who had learned to save bread. Crusts, by January 1945, as the Battle of the Bulge ground to its inevitable conclusion, German officers like Dietrich were making increasingly desperate calculations. Their own men were weakening from malnutrition, just as American forces appeared to be maintaining full fighting strength despite months of intensive combat. The K rations had become more than food. They had become symbols of a factory and farming capacity that Germany simply could not match, no matter how efficiently they organized their remaining resources. The moment of final realization came not in any single dramatic event, but in the buildup of small observations that together painted an undeniable picture. American wounded who were captured appeared healthier than many German soldiers who had never been injured. Discarded American equipment showed signs of casual abundance. Tools thrown away rather than repaired. Equipment abandoned rather than salvaged. Supplies destroyed rather than left for enemy use. Everything suggested a military force backed by production capacity so vast that individual items had no meaningful value. In his final report to Higher Command, dated February 3, 1945, Dietrich wrote words that would prove prophetic. The enemy's strength lies not merely in superior numbers or equipment, but in a complete system of abundance that we cannot hope to match. Their soldiers eat better in foxholes than our officers eat in garrison. This is not the decadent weakness we were told to expect, but a form of strength against which our traditional efficiencies are inadequate. The K ration had become, in the end, a revelation, not of American weakness, but of American power, expressed in its most basic form, the ability to feed an army so well that chocolate and coffee became routine rather than luxuries. German officers who had begun by mocking these provisions ended by understanding that they represented something unprecedented in military history, an army that truly never starved, supported by a homeland that could produce abundance as easily as scarcity. The war would continue for 3 more months after Dietrich wrote his report. But the psychological victory had already been won in that frozen forest clearing where German officers first tasted American rations. They had faced not just better food, but a better understanding of how wars were actually won, not through superior discipline or tactical brilliance alone, but through the unglamorous but decisive advantage of superior logistics sustained by superior production capacity. In the quiet moments before surrender, as German forces retreated across a landscape they could no longer defend, many officers found themselves remembering not the great battles or stirring speeches, but the simple taste of American chocolate dissolving on their tongues. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it had revealed a truth too large to ignore. They had been fighting not just an army, but an entire civilization organized around principles of abundance rather than scarcity, efficiency rather than desperation, industrial confidence rather than military tradition. The K-ration boxes, scattered and empty now across a dozen European battlefields, had delivered their final message. America had not won through superior courage or tactical innovation, though both had played their part. America had won because it had solved the fundamental equation of modern warfare: how to project not just military force, but industrial abundance across global distances for sustained periods. The army that never starved had proven that in industrial warfare, logistics were not merely